All right. Hey everybody. It's me, it's Dan Bennis with my good friend, good boy, a great
Hey
punk.
everyone.
So yeah, we're here. It's December, what is it? December 17th,
That's right.
2018. And so yeah, we wanted to welcome everyone and just kind of wrap things up for 2018. Maybe a little on the early side, but just in case, because I think we're both going to be busy for the holidays. And yeah, this is a very rare time where there isn't a million things piling up, in my estimation. So let's take a broad view. We've been doing these streams for a few months now. Maybe 2 months or
Two
so?
months. 2 months sounds about right.
Yeah. And honestly, the world feels like a very different place, even since we started this. And uh, I feel I felt very concerned in a lot of ways. I feel like a lot of things are going to be happening really quickly. And a lot of them are very frightening to me. But at the same time, I'm I feel overall good about. I feel good about my life personally. I feel frightened about the overall state of where things are probably headed in terms of free speech, in terms of censorship, in terms of just like global peace. Um, yeah, like in my life, I've never seen things seem to ramp up so quickly. Um, and Tim Pool, who is a journalist that people should follow, he's a very good guy. But he did a stream recently where he talked about this article from from Telegraph. Let me see if I can pull it up. Let me see here. But
What that article covered, Dan.
let me see if I can find it. Oh, man, I wish I. Ah. Let me see here. Well, basically, the article the article was about how we were headed towards a state of unrest that had not been seen since before World War One, and it was yeah, and
I'm sorry, Dan. Did you just say this? Did you say that's violence had not been seen like this before World War One?
just global unrest in general, and
Yeah.
so the point being that. That it just looked it was a general, a military general in the UK, and he was just delivering a speech about how things in his lifetime had never seemed so volatile. Now I have mixed feelings like that. I don't necessarily think that we're going to head towards like a hot war, and or that it'll be like a World War III type event. I honestly don't think the major countries have the stomach for that type of war anymore. but but I do think we're going to see some dramatic changes. Everyone sees it, everyone feels it, and I think they're here. Like the sort of sense of foreboding that I think everyone's felt, at least since 2016, is upon us, and now we're just going to see how things shake out. which sounds drastic and scary, but I don't know. A part of me is like feels really good because I felt like in my line of work, I deal with current events all the time, and I'm kind of involved in the culture wars to a degree. So it's been really like dramatic, I felt, and just there's a sense of dread that you feel. And so now I feel like I don't have to feel dread anymore because things are escalating so quickly. It's like, it just sort of simplifies things, I suppose. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I get that. It's like, well, the bow has broken.
Yes.
It's an interesting, if that's what that article was talking about, global unrest since World War One. That's very interesting. Because I'm fairly familiar with the outbreak of World War One. And I will say there is some interesting parallels, but I do think we are in a different time.
Yes.
And a different place. That sort of militant nationalism and a sort of ignorance to the dangers of modern warfare are not they're not present. I think we're very well aware that we can end the world 8 times over with nukes. I think we're we have a desire to avoid that. I think there are some parallels that are interesting to look at, though. I think there is a rise of nationalism throughout Europe. I think Russia has become somewhat aggressive in the Balkan region again, in Crimea specifically, and in the Ukraine. It's fascinating to think about how a global power is kind of strong-arming a smaller country again and one of their satellite states. And if not put in check, that can turn hot. And who the hell wants to see that?
Yeah.
But Europe is in such disarray right now. I think it can easily turn into a situation where a country who's saying "fuck it," who's going to stop me, like Russia, can get away with a lot. And I think that's dangerous because I don't see the United States stepping in to really do anything to stop them. I do see them using somewhat of like Cold War tactics of arming rebels or providing weaponry to another government to help resist any sort of encroachment on behalf of Russia. But I don't see that turning into a full-scale hot war the way, the Serbian nationalists kind of pulled, Austria-Hungary into a global conflict, where you had all these people jumping to sides on who's gonna see. We're gonna see who's gonna be standing at the end of another European conflict. I find it to be interesting. I think that title is correct. The tensions, global tensions, is that of what the world was at before the Cold War or before World War One. I would agree with that.
Yeah. So you can see though that it's real. I didn't just make it up, and it's interesting. And I don't know. I don't think it's good to have live in dread or anything like that. But I do feel that it seems like everyone is kind of in agreement that things have broken down or are breaking down, at least in the way that they've been in my lifetime. However, I don't what stops me is a sense that that's necessarily going to mean great drama or tragedy or disaster. I mean, I think I feel like we live in a really odd world that more and more this year where we're like, Scott Adams talks about, people are seeing, Democrats and Republicans watch the same movie on 2 different screens. And that's how I kind of feel this is, where people who are very dystopic about the future think we're headed towards a dystopia, and people who think that we're headed towards like a technological revolution. And the signs are there that point to both, like that we're on the verge of incredible flourishing and amazing technological breakthroughs, or that we're headed towards like a horrific disaster.
Well, Dan, you know what? That's interesting that you mentioned that, because I think that characterizes the First World War again to a T. I mean, it is the dawn of this war industrial age. Okay, we have modern human flight is taking place. We have, people are getting vaccines, and we're learning more about germ theory, and there was no greater time of human innovation where it's so apparent at the exponential growth human beings had done technologically than from the 1880s till the closer to the 1920s. And World War I was a demonstration of that. I mean, you had gas attacks and, again, dog fights in the air with, airplanes and machine guns and artillery pieces that could literally... Say again?
That's your type of fight,
I mean, it shows how dangerous, modern technology really made the battlefield, where infantry were sort of obsolete and just for the killing. And it's interesting that, like a loaded gun, technology can do good things and it can do bad things. And who's to say it has to be one way or the other? Oh, we're heading towards Armageddon, or we're heading towards this technological breakthrough. I think we'll see both in some ways. I think there'll be light at the end of the tunnel of how we can get out of this because of what technology has afforded us. And at the same time, I think we'll be very well aware of how human beings can be so self-destructive, and we can really bring this whole experiment to a halt if we so choose. Now, that experiment could be democracy or the human experiment to be more general. Elon Musk talks about AI quite a bit, and that's kind of making me think about technology in a way I never really had to think about. I think speaking of the year, I think this is the first year, and it came from Elon Musk's talk with Joe Rogan on his podcast. It was like one of the first times I really considered AI and the dangers it poses. And what kind of a world would that look like? Is there going to be a pushback movement similar to like Romanticism in the 1800s, during the industrial period, where people are saying like, hey, wouldn't it be nice if we didn't spend all of our time in factories and we got out in nature? And reason is one thing, but can't we just enjoy the fact that we as human beings experience emotion? I'm curious to see and anxious to see where this leads us.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think people are going to be increasingly fond of some ideas, of Ludditism, and just ideas that technology ain't all it's cracked up to be. More and more. I mean, I would not be surprised to see those communities, or more just like the communities of like technology and the rejection of it just diverging very dramatically. Not that they haven't already, but I just think we're going to see more people that just realize that their phones and everything are not saving them, and that in many ways they shackle them, and it's going to be really hard to divorce yourself part way, I think, is the thing. People are going to realize like you either have one of these phones, you're either online, you're either on social media, and you have no privacy, and you always have this like subtle depression from just being overstimulated constantly, or you have none of it. There's just no two ways around it, and that's what I've experienced, as I've multiple times like tried to get off Facebook, And I'm like, oh, there's no way. Like, there's no actual off. I can't work without Facebook. I literally can't have a job. So I would love to get off, but I can only imagine that will get more and more, immersive as things go and move forward. And that doesn't sound pleasant to me. Like, I want to spend less time interacting with technology, but here I am, and here I always am. Like, it's impossible to get away from it. And look, I use that Google Cardboard, whatever they call it, Google something or other, where they put it on your head. It's not Google Cardboard, it's something, and that stuff is crazy. Like, I was really shocked. It's like real VR, and it's the early stages. So I see that, and I just think, like, what kid is going to be able to get away from this stuff at all? Like, if you thought kids were addicted to video games when you were young, I mean, I know I was. I feel like it's gonna be far worse now. And yeah, so I don't know. I imagine more and more people we're seeing the depression in people come to the fore. We're seeing the social problems come to the fore. Both political parties in America have raged against the stuff for different reasons, but more or less the same reasons. I think it's just they express it differently. And so, we'll see. We'll see where it goes.
Hey, Dan,
Yeah.
as comics, I'm curious if you saw Tom Green posted a special, so to speak, on his YouTube.
No, I did not know.
Him performing stand-up in Philadelphia, and I really enjoyed it. He did a really decent set, and a lot of what he talked about, I'd say a big chunk of what he talked about was he was talking about, it's one of those, quote unquote old man bits where it's like, hey, back in the day, things were different. But he had so many points. I thought it was somewhat novel the way he talked about them. But these are points that are constantly brought up. He goes, he said this, he goes, life was better before phones. Life was better before cell phones. He goes, you would leave your house and you'd be free.
Yeah.
You'd be free. He goes, now everyone knows exactly where you are, what you're doing, what you're looking at, who you're talking to. He goes, when you left the house, you were in Narnia. Like, it was just a magical place where anything could happen. No one knew where you were.
Yeah.
No one knew.
That will never happen again.
You just weren't home. That's all they knew about that.
Yeah.
And if they called you, they had to call the one phone in your home, which was next to your refrigerator in your kitchen. That was it. That's where the conversation took place. No one was talking behind each other's backs like that. Like, oh, you're posting on Facebook, who you talking to. He goes off on that sort of stuff. And he also said, the fact that information didn't travel fast back then, he goes, is such bullshit. He goes, I remember I was a kid, and in a very Tom Green way, he talks about how he just hid in a bush. He was like, I was hiding in a bush. Why? Because you could do those things, and we were pretty bored back then. So I was hiding in a bush, and a kid came running down the street saying, President Reagan has been shot. The president has been shot. He goes, and I jumped out. I jumped out of the bush, and I started screaming, the president has been shot. And people were opening up their windows and screaming, the president has been shot. That all happened within minutes of the president being shot. He goes, so we all figured this stuff out. It's not like we didn't find out information. Yeah, that top bit. It's definitely worth a look.
Cool. Well, I remember seeing him here on Norm Macdonald Live, which is a great comedy podcast. I guess it doesn't exist anymore now that he's on Netflix, but yeah. What's that?
I said, and who knows how long that will last?
Yeah. Well,
Dan, that's something I will say I was surprised of this year, which
yeah,
the past few months, if you told me in November that places like Netflix, YouTube, Google, Facebook, what do they call that? FANG, right?
yeah, exactly. The FANG stocks:
Right.
Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, and Google.
I mean, they control the narrative in such a way. And I knew that in November,
Yeah,
but nothing could prepare me for this trickle down into other sorts of, other sorts of theaters of operation, if you will. Like what's happening on Patreon is really scary to me.
it's terrifying. I mean, that's the thing that is. Yeah, that's honestly the biggest thing to me this year. The fact that the after Patreon booted Sargon and a bunch of other good guys, and I don't know, maybe some bad guys, but a lot of them are great guys as far as I've ever known. But once they were booted, and then Tim Pool and some others were talking about Subscribestar. Anyway, they're like, move to Subscribestar. It's like the same thing. You can fund personalities that you want to support. Anyway, PayPal pulled their support from Subscribestar. So within days, when people saw they were all going to Subscribestar, PayPal pulled away. So they're like, if you got funded on Subscribestar through PayPal, you cannot access your funds. They won't give it to you. I mean, that's insane. Like, these are not free markets. And it's like that. And
for the first time, Dan, as a libertarian, I'm screaming like, "Hey, where the fuck's the government on this?" It's like, I'm like,
yeah, no, I know it. And
a little bit of government. Look, you fuckers interfere on everything else. Can you fucking try and free the market up a little bit? Jesus.
Right. Well, it just goes to show you, we don't have free markets at all in any way. Not even close. We don't, and everything that people have been saying for years, like, oh, you don't like YouTube? Well, make your own platform. Why don't you start your own? That's exactly what people are trying to do. And then they just get screwed for no reason because these people have a cabal. I mean, it's not just Silicon Valley. It's not just media. It's not entertainment. It's PayPal. It's the credit card companies. It's everyone, everything. So
what makes me nervous about that, Dan, is the fact that, I mean, only 8% of the population agrees with this bullshit. So,
yeah, well, that's the thing. It has nothing to do with social justice. That's become abundantly clear.
I don't know what this is about.
I don't know either, to be honest. Like, but it just takes you down some weird conspiratorial rabbit holes because it's impossible to know. All you know is that it doesn't make sense, and then it's clearly it has nothing to do with free markets because people like Sargon were making Patreon a lot of money, and they didn't care. They just booted him anyway, even though he didn't affect their terms of service at all. He didn't step outside of terms of service, and it doesn't matter. It's just these partisan character assassinations, and not worse than that, destruction of lives. So, but it's partisan, but then it isn't clearly why. It isn't clear why it's partisan. So
yeah, I really don't understand where. You know what? It's interesting you mentioned the idea of like, oh, these people on their phones, they don't have any social skills, blah, blah, blah. I think this is coming to fruition right here, where you have people who can't stand to hear someone disagree with them, so they cut them out completely.
Yeah.
And you used to have to get along with people. And I told you that story of me at camp when I was a kid. It's like, I hated this kid. He was kind of a bully, but we had to eat together. So you kind of just dealt with the person, and you learned that this person's a son of a bitch, but you know what? I'm going to be with this kid for 8 weeks, so it has to work out this way.
Right.
And you did. You got on. You learned how to deal with people and live and let live. And you know what? things were fine. You may even find a moment or two where you can share a laugh together. It's pretty incredible. And what I'm seeing from these major networks of on the internet, and like you mentioned, the credit card companies, Patreon, YouTube, I mean, whoever these people are, you're seeing this sort of denial of there can't be any disagreement, and it's only 8% of the population that really is in agreement with the politics that's being pushed by this sort of mass censorship. I think it's super dangerous in the United States to observe. It makes me nervous. I'm not for monopolies. I want competition. I want markets. And the government isn't even stepping in for that. And why would they? Because if they have an apparatus that can turn on and off what they would like, I mean, why wouldn't you want that tool? I would say it's ironic that this is happening on the social level and not on the government level, because the government's essentially run by Republicans. The executive, the judicial, the legislative, to some degree. We just lost the House. I mean, Republicans lost the House to the Democrats, and that's so it's mainly a Republican government show, and at the same time, the most social pressure, the most censorship is going on in the social sector, amongst these major companies from Silicon Valley. And no one's pushing back. Like, what the fuck is happening?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, aside from the thing that I come to is like, well, these companies want a global market, and a lot of the countries that they'll be doing business with that are getting, stronger and growing, building their economies, they don't have the same focus on human rights, individual rights as we do in America, or that we've been used to anyway.
Or that we've been led to believe.
Right. So these companies are trying to appeal to the leadership in those countries, and so in order to do that, they're quelling dissent. Just today, and in fact, I was reading another article. Here we go. This one I have right here. I actually haven't read it in full, but here we go. Google's secret China project effectively ended after an internal confrontation. Google was working on a secret data analysis system to develop a censored search engine for China. So Google, obviously, the masters of search engine, they're the kings of the search engine, the only real search engine anyone uses anymore. And they wanted to create one for China that censored anything that the Chinese government deemed inappropriate. Now, that's obviously wrong. It's not okay. It does beg the question, well, what have they censored because our government has told them to? Like, what information are we not privy to?
But you know what, Dan, that's my point that I think is so bizarre about this. I'm always nervous about governments doing this sort of thing. Yet Zuckerberg is talking to Merkel about, anything that's anti-immigrant, make sure it's not on German Facebook. When China and Google have been working hand in hand with censoring their search engines for years. So it's not, how secret can this be? Right. What I find to be the most disturbing is, in the age of Trump with his overreach and all that stuff that everyone freaks out about, he's the next Hitler, blah, blah, blah. Yet at the same time, he's not the one fucking censoring my Facebook. He's not the one curtailing my search engine results. He's not the one telling me what I can and cannot say on stages. That's the thing that really bothers me, because it is the free market in some regard. Well, because it's not the government. And at the same time, any sort of dissent is like social suicide. I mean, did you hear Tim Pool talk about the conversation had between Peterson and Dave Rubin about creating some sort of network?
A little bit. He did a live stream today, right? About, I know Dave Rubin and Jordan Peterson have brought out the fact that they're going to be creating a new Patreon-like system. So I don't know. I only saw a little bit of this, but I really would need to hear
From
more.
what I understand, from what Jordan Peterson had said on that stream, it would appear as though this is more of a build up on something that's already been in development.
Mm-hmm.
So they're adding a Patreon-like subscription sort of facet to a network that's already up, or that's already being set up, and the network works like like a media platform where you can exchange information, you can follow people, share ideas, exchange things. That whole element without worrying about being censored or someone misconstruing provoking conversation as hate speech. And now Peterson's saying him and his team, or whatever the fuck is going on over there, are really pushing towards trying to add a Patreon-like subscription element to that in the wake of what's been happening. So if that's the case, I would love to be someone, not even that I need it, but I would love for Cabaret to be a part of that, just out of sheer support. If we're another soldier in the line, I think that's important.
Yeah.
But that was when I heard about that, I said, you know what? If such a network exists, I would like to vote with my dollar in the economy, so to speak, and I would like to be a part of that, because people have to. I think people should flood to places that are not providing the services that they want. I mean, look at just Sargon alone. And some of his videos have more views than CNN ever has in a segment on.
Yeah. So Sargon is a remarkably powerful man in the world of media today in ways that I don't think people really fully appreciate. But I think that he has a lot more pull and a lot more influence. He knows all the right people, and he's just strenuously, ferociously independent. And I mean, you can see it in the way that they've tried to silence him out of nowhere. And you can see it too, where I mean, I've been following his channel for a couple of years now, and I've seen, frankly, look, I mean, more than many people, he's really affected the way that I viewed a lot of political and social issues. He opened my eyes to a lot of just what's really going on in the world, I think, and certainly in Europe, because I was very ignorant of a lot of their issues. I mean, I can't say that I agree with him on everything, but at the same time, I don't live in London or in
you also don't have to, you know what I mean? Like, that's the other thing. Yeah. You don't have to agree with everyone on everything.
Yeah. But I have a lot of empathy for, it sounds really hard to go through what he's gone through. He's been viciously attacked, and I think it's in really brutal ways. Time and time again, he's had people try to destroy his life, his livelihood, and his family. And I can, there's nothing more important than those things. So, yeah. So I think he's a really important voice, and I think he's had a lot of influence like, he's affected UK politics dramatically. I think more
directly. He's directly affected UK politics.
Yeah. So it's really fascinating. We're in a really interesting place, and I think in a lot of ways, like we were saying, technology is moving very rapidly, and with that brings incredible opportunity, and it is like right there on our doorstep is like incredible opportunities. In a way, I feel like the way that we can stop a lot of or curb a lot of problems from coming about is just if the people that stand to perhaps lose the monopolies that they have as technology frees up, they can either cope with that in an effective, productive way, or they can become tyrannical. And I think right now what we're seeing is tyranny, you know, in no uncertain terms. But that can either go two ways, you know. They can either, you know, I guess accept that things are changing, or ramp things up until they become violent, you know, more violent than they already have. I think those are just those are the only two things. And if we are able to kind of get out from under the thumb of big tech, big finance, big everything, then we'll be okay. Big government more than anything else. If not, you know, world wars have happened before, not too long ago. So,
Yeah, I think coming to the realization of how much power these companies have has been something that's I've truly developed over the past year.
Staggering. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't think they could have this much power, because at the end of the day, I always said to myself, well, they cater to the general public, and half the population doesn't agree with the other half of the population, so they have to be somewhat middle of the road. You know, CNN, Fox News, they get to pick a side, and that's fine because they're going after an audience. Sure. But Google, Facebook, YouTube, I mean, everyone uses these networks, you know, these social networks. There's no way that they could be so heavy-handed towards one side. And then they did something, and I said, all right, they're just playing cover your ass, right? They're trying to take the politically correct way of going about it, and that's fine, because you know what? This is not a free-for-all after all. It's a company, so they have to, you know, be a bit more presentable. Sure. And then they took another step and another step and another step. Then they started changing their algorithms to what sort of things you can see. Then it's oh, we're gonna ghost this video, or oh, we're gonna, you know, this you can't even watch anymore. Then they start depersoning people. Like what happened to Gavin McInnes is truly frightening to me. Like there's nothing. This guy is a provocateur, sure. But for the most part, you go to any bar in most working class neighborhoods in the United States, and you're going to run into a Gavin McInnes, right? Yeah. He has his elbows up on the bar, and he's going to tell you a thing or two on how he feels. Yeah. And there's nothing fucking wrong with that. Yeah. At no point have I ever heard him advocate for violence.
No.
And that is where the line should always be drawn. This guy has a common person's opinion on things. What he's saying is not shocking.
He's a comedic person too. Like he's a comedic personality, and it's not like I know people who have kicked him out of bars out here. Like it's really scary to know the stuff happening in my neighborhood. Gavin McInnes and his Proud Boys went for a drink a few months ago at the Roost, which is a bar in near Silver Lake, Glendale, and some dudes that I know from the comedy world, they kicked them out. They went to the management and threatened them and bullied them out of the bar. And so, you know, they made it so that they couldn't be served, that they weren't welcome there. I mean, it's like surreal, and it's shameful. Like, you know, these are people that I've been in my life, you know, and I'm just, I can't believe that. In many ways, I can't believe that this is the world that I live in. But
the amount of people, I mean, I've had people in my comedic circles say and do things that, you know, gives me pause, you know. Then again, I have 4 of them, so what's a few more?
Sure.
But I hear things, and I go and I say to myself, like, you know, are you hearing yourself? Do you really think, I mean, I hear this all the time. Well, the amount of, you know, alt writers that are stand-up comics, you know, we do, improv and we do sketch, so we're an accepting group and blah, blah, blah. But once you get up to those writers' rooms and, if you go to any, stand-up show, it's all a bunch of basement-dwelling, alt-right, women-hating, misogynist, homophobic people, blah, blah, blah. And, well, I don't even go to that place anymore because there was a podcast that people did there, and there's 2 white men, and there are a bunch of Nazis at that place. I said, are we really calling up? I told the person to kind of, get a grip a little bit. I said, are we really calling a alternative comedy space, right? A place that caters to sketch and improv. Are we really going to call that place a haven of neo-Nazis? Like, are we really saying this now? Like, because why? Because 2 comics made some distasteful jokes, and both of those comics have to be white men. So therefore, it's now a bastion of the alt-right. Give me a fucking break. Like, don't you feel like you're taking this a little too far? At no point, and here's the other thing too, at no point do any of these people say anything even remotely homophobic, racist, anything like that. They play with the topics of sexuality and race because that's what comedians do. We play with these topics. It's part of the social fabric that we mess with. It's like, hey, you ever think of it this way? Or, isn't it interesting that these people say they don't do this, but they actually do? I mean, I really think we forgot the role of fucking comedy. And
well, yeah, the other thing is, like, even if they did say something homophobic, like, people are allowed to have dumb opinions. That isn't, it's not the end of the world. Everyone has dumb opinions. I know people who think ridiculous things. It's like, it doesn't mean that you get to destroy their lives. I mean, I guess it does mean that, but it shouldn't. I mean, that is not the way to handle that sort of nonsense.
Dan, I had mentioned to you before the podcast that there's a lot of things that really, not a lot of things that really get under my skin. There's one specific thing that really gets under my skin. And you know what, quite frankly, I don't even want to talk about it. However, this topic that I'm referring to, there's documentaries on this all over the place. At no point did I ever think about calling up the provider that is distributing this material and say, like, you got to stop. At no point, if I heard these, opinions espoused by someone, did I want to say, like, this person shouldn't be allowed here? You have to kind of live amongst people you disagree with in a free society. And for some reason, I can get that. I really don't. The only kind of person you don't want around is the violent sort, right? I mean, that's about it. It's where the rubber meets the road. It's like, look, we tolerate you. That's what liberals do. We're supposed to tolerate people, and, tolerate the good, the bad, and the ugly. It's not just tolerate what we consider to be tolerable. Like, what the fuck is that? That's you, that's just you being opinionated. That's not you being tolerant. You can call it what, this is tolerance to me. I don't tolerate your intolerance. Well, too fucking bad.
Yeah.
Too bad. That's not, I really don't think you get tolerance then. Right? Because the idea was, when we were, waving our finger at homophobic people, all around the country because, they didn't want to let up on gay marriage rights. We were saying, hey, this isn't about you. This is about them. And we were right to say that to these people. Hey, this isn't about you. This is about them. You have to learn to accept things that you don't agree with. We're not forcing you to do anything. So don't stop. Don't rain on someone else's parade. And you know what? They could take a page out of that playbook and reread it, because you know what? They have departed so far from this idea of tolerance. They wouldn't recognize it. They haven't recognized it. The intolerant left is what they are.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely had issues with the right when I was young, and I just, it was frustrating the amount of things that they didn't seem to be able to think clearly about, and the amount of rigidity that they had in their thinking, and that hasn't changed. I mean, I still think there's plenty of that on the right, but there's more on the left for sure. I mean, there's no doubt about it. And from my experience, and so you know, I'm not on the right. I mean, I am, I guess, in certain ways. I mean, economically, I would say, I would probably. I'm certainly not. I don't like a lot of leftist ideas. I don't like Marxism, but it's more just like I find myself gravitating towards a lot of people who relate to the right today, because it's like, in order to even be remotely on the right, you have to be sort of an avant-garde figure. You have to be kind of an independent thinker, just because leftism is so widely accepted in our society and seen as the status quo that, if you look for an independent thinker, they're almost inevitably going to be at least correlated with the right today.
Well, that's the word, correlated, because I feel like, was it the Overton window, right? Didn't that, everything is completely shifted to where I know people who would consider themselves center left who are considered alt-right. And why? Because they believe
that is a left-leaning guy, and he's been called alt-right, countless times. So
yeah, I mean, I think of someone like there's a whole bunch. A lot of the people
was left-leaning in a lot of ways,
for sure. I think there's some elements to him. They're quite, classically liberal. And at the same time, I think he speaks to a level of conservatism that is truly there too. But he's certainly not alt-right. I mean, I don't know what kind of nonsense that is. Well, I'll tell you what it is. It's the manifestation of people looking to make an enemy out of this person because he's speaking blasphemy, right? And that's what comes down to. That's why things have shifted so far away, is because a small group has dictated the conversation, what can and cannot be said. And the danger behind that is now anyone outside of that small group who speaks, non-truths, whatever that means, is labeled an alt-right, a heretic, right? Yeah. That's heretic and alt-right are synonymous now.
Well, if you're on the left, if you're not on the left, you're the enemy in their mind, and I'll say their mind, because it is like a hive mind. So
they probably wouldn't even see anything offensive about that. They're like, yes, we are a mind.
Right.
That's the irony. That, like, they only, I don't know.
But
Orwell constantly wrote books about the dangers of socialism as a socialist.
Yes.
Because what he focused on in his books constantly was the human element, right? At the end of the day, these are people that make decisions, and people are flawed creatures, which means they have not just greed, which is a correct thing to point out in terms of a danger in capitalism, greed, but what about bitterness? What about jealousy, resentfulness, hatred, right? That also still exists. And, well, I think Orwell did a great job identifying that and saying, look, the socialist system can work, but we really need to be careful of our human qualities because it goes off the rails almost all the time. And everyone says, look, it's a demonstration that socialism can't work. And I kind of agree with that assessment. But I think a socialist like Orwell would say it can work if we're aware of our humanity. And that takes a lot of, you got to be really humble. You have to be really self-aware, and human beings, that's the last thing we are, So that'll get you a couple million dead in Europe in a century. So I think this experiment has run its course. I'm not a fan of that stuff. I would say,
which experiment in part specifically?
Well, you could talk about the communist experiment. You could also talk about the fascist experiment. How self-aware were these people when they were, blown away, pregnant women in fields? How self-aware were they? Some would suggest that they were quite self-aware and hated what they did. But you know what? Quite a few people took utter glee in being able to dispose of the other, or the person that was poisonous to their culture, and I think the far left has this glimmer in their eye of the same thing, where you see it at a very low level with kicking Gavin McInnes out of a bar. I mean, he's not hurting anyone. He's just having a drink, He has views that are different than yours, but he's not calling for violence against anyone or anything. But I think there's this and I'll say it, like comics, I mean, a lot of them don't have a lot to hang their hat on. Like a bunch of starving artists, we're trying to make it. And I think what a great opportunity to give yourself some self-importance than to take a social justice stance and become some sort of fucking freedom fighter and get to kick people like Gavin McInnes out of a bar.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, I'm well aware of that too. Like I don't want to be, some guy that lives vicariously through a political movement. That's not it. But Dan, as if, we know each other for a little bit, just a bit of a backstory. And I think you and me, you have shared this information with me as well. We have had opinions similar to our own for a very long time. And it's taken us this long to really speak out because we feel as though we are compelled to now more than ever out of fear of where this is going. This is not because I need the fucking validation. I wish I was not doing this to some degree. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we both are doing this out of a sense of duty, this is a remarkable time. Everyone knows it. And I want to document that, I said something, I wanted to, I didn't just go with it. And I hope that things end up okay, but most people think that they're not going to, in my world, or they're just completely oblivious that anything is even happening at all. But I mean, there's no question it is, and it's like, all you have to do, if you want to go along to get along, I don't know. I feel like that used to work for a long time, but I don't think it's going to work much longer. It's going to be really hard to not have an opinion. And you can either have the opinion that everyone tells you to have, and that's fine, but you'll just become kind of a mindless drone. And I have friends that have done that, who have never been political in their whole lives, never been aware or engaged in any way. And then all of a sudden, the last year or so, they have opinions, and they're strong opinions. All of a sudden they're all radical. But I'm like, I know who you are. I've known you for years, and I know that you don't have any background or context to anything that you're talking about now. And so it's like, I can only draw the conclusion that,
you're ideologically possessed.
Yeah, you're ideologically possessed. Exactly. So it's sad. That's a sad thing. And I've seen that. It's one of those things where it's something you read about, that I've read about for years and not really understood it. And now I'm like, oh, that's what I read about, 10, 15, 20 years ago. It's like surreal. It's a very surreal feeling. So,
yeah. Do you remember the political censorship that occurred in the 90s at all?
Yeah. I mean, I do.
I think that was one of the big things that I, in college, was able to retroactively. I felt like when looking back at the 90s, it pushed me away from the right, when I was leaving college, because I was like, man, I remember that, that religious right wing and the censorship that was coming down.
Yes.
And I remember the left matching it with their sense of like what political correctness was, PC. Like I remember that being a term, and I remember the right scoffing at it. I remember hearing about, bullying in school and how that was such a fucking epidemic. And then and then that kind of getting exacerbated by the Columbine shootings, and we have to be nice towards each other, and everyone's different, and blah blah blah. And I think there was like a bit of a place for that, for sure. I mean, you are going to school with kids from every walk of life and everything like that, and I feel like it kind of reimagined itself in the mid 2000s in the same way. It's like, hey, we really need to get people the right to marry who they want. And I feel like it remanifested itself that way. Like, hey, we're here to kind of fix something that we observe to be, wrong. But once that marriage law was passed, then it became very apparent about how things went off the rails. It became this train that couldn't be stopped. And very much like it started with like, hey, let's try and like keep the bullying to a minimum. Then it was like, oh, watch what things you can and cannot say, what views you can express in class, how tolerant can we be of intolerance, and I feel like the 90s had a lot of that. Violence, right? That was the other thing too. This we live in such a violent culture. Bowling for Columbine came out talking about gun culture, and the video game Doom was the game that the Columbine shooters, played, and dodgeball was a violent game, and there's this, I remember being a young man going like, no, I kind of like dodgeball, and I like wrestling with my friends, and I like that, physical competitive element, and I don't mind crude jokes, and I like, it's not that I'm making fun of people. It's like I'm just making a joke that may be a little dark or off color. And I remember seeing the difference there and, pushing back against that. Yeah. And I feel like no one stopped this train after the marriage laws went through, after the federal recognition of gay marriage, which was a good thing in my opinion. I'm not against it. I think that had to happen. I was, for it. I think that was a thing far too late in our nation's history. However, after that came to be, well, what the fuck? I mean, it was like this crazy horse running towards a burning stable. It just needed to be stopped, and it went to everything. Oh, okay, it's women are severely oppressed, and trans activists this, and bathrooms, and it was one sort of oppressive milestone after the next that needed to be knocked down to a point where we were chasing ghosts, in my opinion. I really don't think the world is nearly as intolerant as they make it out to be. I don't know. I think that very much like a lot of the early Soviets and Bolsheviks would agree, in order to keep people unified, you constantly need to have the struggle, and that's Lenin speaking right there. And I think they need the struggle. I think that's why the alt-right becomes this beautiful phantom they could constantly attack. I really don't know anyone on the alt-right. I really don't. Yeah. And if Gavin McInnes is the closest thing to the alt-right you got, I got news for you. Go to half the bars in the world, in the country. And, these people have been alt-right without incident for quite some time. They have families. They take their daughters to soccer practice. It's
Gavin McInnes is honestly, as far as I've ever known, and I don't know his work that well, but I feel fairly confident saying he's just like your average run-of-the-mill guy. Like he's just a guy's guy. That's it.
Just a guy's guy.
I mean, that's not a bad thing. Now, yeah, look, I feel uncomfortable saying this, but the reality is like the whole thing that the right wing always said, like, hey, gay marriage is a slippery slope. I mean, it's a correlation more than a causation. You can't prove it, but they definitely were right in this instance that, like you said, after that happened, things got crazy, and all of a sudden people just lost track of reality. Now, like, I'm not opposed. Like, I don't think it's right for anyone to have special rights based on their sexuality. So, you know, I would say that government should just get out of marriage completely. But
yeah, for sure.
You know, I mean, I'm not a fan of government in general, but like all I'll say is this, like, people would always say, oh my gosh, the right wing is so crazy. Why do they care about gay marriage all the time? And I didn't know. I still don't know but like, if you're going to make that distinction that after gay marriage, everything went nuts, like, that's what they said was going to happen. And now it happened. So I guess they get a little bit more credit.
But that is true. That is true. And you're like, hey, they're right. And I think because the right that were fearful of gay marriage, because let's also remember that close to half of Republicans at the time were for gay marriage. And if you look demographically, the younger Republicans, I think it was like 75% were for gay marriage at the time of the vote. The younger Republicans, those under 30. So
I'm not going to vote against gay marriage, but I definitely will vote against all of the insane culture we live in right now.
Oh, absolutely, 100%. So
down, yeah,
right. No, 100%. It should be burned to the ground. Now, I think the interesting thing here is that most people on the left weren't for continuing this war and pulling it down that slippery slope, like you had mentioned. Yeah. I think it's that small group that does, and that's what those people on the right who are nervous going like, just so you know, there's always a group of people who are going to want to marry trees next. And you're like, oh, shut the fuck up. But here we are, where some guy's trying to get married to like a fucking street sign, and you know that's an issue. Mm-hmm. You know, what's a man? What's a woman? Who can fucking answer that anymore? I thought I knew back in high school when I took a biology class, but we don't know anymore. So, you know, you're right. It got nuts. And here's the sad part. I think the majority of Democrats, majority of people on the left are totally against taking it down this path. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, you know, there's that group, that 10% that are just want to keep pushing it. And I think there's a reason to say, like, just so you know, this doesn't always lead to a good place. Yeah, because there's always that group of people that's going to take it there. What I'm really frightened about is just how much power that small group has. Because if you're like, wait, there's always that group. It's like, yeah, there's always a bunch of idiots doing their own thing that have no bearing on the rest of society. But these people do. They have such a bearing on the social conversation. They have so much power. You know, when
they appear to control everything.
Yeah, they really do.
I mean, so yeah,
control our schools, control our conversations. The most important thing, right? They control our media. Like, they control our entertainment, right? Mm-hmm. As comics, we definitely talked about that. I think the movies that are coming out now are just terrible. Yeah, and I think you have a great point with how, you know, to make a buck for the global market, we're going to apply to everyone. But you know what? Even in China, they have a word for, what was it, like white liberal or something like that?
Yes, yeah.
And I think I think that, you know, if the idea is, oh, our social justice message is so we can make top grossing films overseas, I think that may be a mistake too. You know, so um, it's an interesting concept. I just
Baizhuo. Baizhuo. This is
by
what. Sorry.
Baizhuo, or no,
This,
they do inflections. There's probably 3 ways to say that. There it is.
Baizhuo is the derogatory term millions of Chinese are using to describe America's wide left progressive liberals. These guys here. We know them.
Hey, see that person on that screen right there?
Yeah.
Woman lets out agonizing screams. I just want to point out, we don't know what she identifies as.
That's
And here's the other secondary part. That looks like someone who may say that they don't identify as a woman.
yes, very much so.
So this, I don't ask for people.
Crazy.
I don't ask for people's preferred pronouns because I assume based on how they're signaling how they wish to be identified due to gender norms, that I'll just call them a man if they appear as a man and a woman as a woman. But if they look like that, I know that they probably have some very interesting views on politics.
Yes.
It's kind of interesting to me. Like, at no point do you think that person's like, oh my God, I just got back from the Kenny Chesney concert, and which was a real issue because my National Rifle Association meeting, it was at the same time, but they canceled it. So anyway, it's like that person isn't. I would, if they start talking like that, I would lose my mind.
Yeah.
So that person is famous. Like, you know, that person, you know who that person is. I would say I would be interested to hear sort of after the fact, like when she has kids and they go, Mom, was that you who screamed at the sky when the president was elected? You know, the president that could only serve 2 terms, like that was you screaming at the sky. And then I realized my whole hypothetical fell apart because there's no way that woman is having kids.
Yeah.
Probably considers it an oppression to the patriarchy, the fact that she could reproduce.
Right. But I think a huge part of all this project we're going, that we're dealing with is that, so like the right wing was like, hey, you do this gay marriage thing, just so you know, it's a slippery slope. And we were like, oh my God, that's ridiculous. And for whatever reason, maybe they were right, maybe it's just coincidence, it did turn out to be everything went insane shortly thereafter.
True.
Our culture fell apart shortly thereafter. Now, the people on the left will not acknowledge that it's even different. That's the crazy thing that's driving people insane. I think that.
What do you mean? Do you mean that we're still living in some sort of like hyper oppressed sort of place?
If I said like, everything went crazy and the right was right about that, they would not acknowledge that in any way. They would just refuse to acknowledge that we live in a very different world than we did, after 2010 or whatever it was. They just won't acknowledge it. I'm not saying it's better or worse. Maybe it's better, but it's way different, and I don't know, like, just acknowledge that that these things, clearly consequences happen, things change, and it's not the same. Like, what's popular is wildly different. What's considered normal, or the idea of normal, it's basically been deconstructed. Like, everything is wildly different. So
I would say the scary thing is there became ideological purity tests immediately after it, because most people were on board with the idea of gay marriage. Most people were on board. So the interesting about that is you had Republicans who had their little equal sign filters on their Facebook, right? You had people on the left, people on the right, you had everyone. And I think that was like the last time you could have a nuanced conversation about things.
Yeah.
Because after that,
ironically, that was one of the last times that the country was basically united about gay marriage, Like it was one of the last times we all felt really good together,
I would agree with that. And it's very interesting. I would also point out that when it came to the question of like, well, what's next? I think that kind of bugged me. It's like, why do we have to go hunting for the next thing?
Yeah.
I feel like this was something that its time had come organically, and we were ready for it, and we did it. And then the left kind of started going down this path of, well, this is when the Marxist really came out. Like it became real clear, because the Democrats felt like, and mission accomplished, like we've done it, right? Now let's talk about healthcare, right? Like that became, and the far left was like, healthcare, schmelthcare. Let's talk about ending the patriarchy. And I think that's a huge division right there that showed how, and that's the thing, the far left then held the Democrats hostage from then on out. Because it's like, what do you mean you're not for helping these oppressed people? You just got gay people the right to vote, or the right to get married. What do you mean you're turning your back on the disenfranchised now, right? You're turning your back on the oppressed now at their moment of need. So gay marriage is just enough for you, huh? Like that's all you're willing to do. Like some liberal you are, and they kind of held them at a gunpoint, proverbially. And I think that they were at the marching orders of that group from then on out, because of how monumental the gay rights, the gay marriage vote was. I think outside of that, most 90% of Democrats were like, I just want to kind of fix healthcare now, or like, let's talk about something else that Democrats were talking about way back when. I don't even remember what their fucking platforms were anymore. Ending the war was a good one.
Yeah.
And that quickly changed when when Obama became president.
I mean, when I was a kid, you could get away with being basically libertarian, but thinking you're a Democrat. Not anymore. Like I thought that. Well, I felt like there was but lean libertarian. Nowadays, that just seems insane. But
well, Dan, you remember at barbecues and all that stuff, right? You would have an uncle talking, and they would say something like, look, I'm a Democrat, but you know what? These taxes are just like too high. Like they got to come down.
Sure. Yeah.
And a Republican would pipe up and say something like, look, I'm a Republican. I'm a conservative. I believe the American family is the corner piece to stability in the United States. But you know what? This gay marriage thing, I mean, who am I to say who you can and cannot get married to?
Yeah.
Right? Like people would have these conversations constantly. There was no sort of ideological purity test going on either side. And if you did, most people met in the middle. Most people were like, look, I'm kind of like, do you, whatever that meant, like it's, that's where the middle had, oddly enough, had such staying power. And honestly, I think it was the fact that gay marriage was something that people could constantly, that kept the sides together. It was, ironically enough, the struggle for gay marriage was the uniting factor. And after that struggle was over, it's like, okay, now we get to go back on the other side of the wall again.
It makes you wonder if people like who knew how these games were played, people who were who honestly had a vested interest in keeping things stable, knew something that we didn't and that I don't to this day. But it's like, may like because they would say this, and people who are old enough to remember, like they would say, if you get rid of gay marriage, this will all fall apart. And you're like, what are you talking about, you weird homophobe? You know. But then that's what happened. So it's like, look, that isn't an excuse to keep people from having separate rights. You know, that's not okay. But the answer that people are coming to, it seems like for some reason people are always like, well, someone has to have less rights than others. So now gay people get rights and, you know, white men don't, you know, straight white men will take away their rights. And it's like, no, it doesn't have to, like, just everyone gets the same rights, period. Equal, you know, that's it.
Well, again, I think that's the that was the Marxists that really came out of the woodwork, and their voices became very it was very vocalized how they felt about a lot of things outside of, again, I'd say the struggle for gay marriage was a very commonplace conversation. I mean, it's something that any American could have talked about and had an opinion on and felt pretty educated on. But if you were to talk to someone in 2008 about trans activists, you know, and their right, the vast majority of Americans would be like, what is that? Like, right. I don't even know what you're talking about. Now it's part of the national conversation because it's, you know, the far left has had such a, you know, has been so incredibly vocal and dictated the conversation. But my point is that the center, where the left and the right met, ironically enough, what kept us from tearing at each other's throats was that we all agreed that the struggle to have gay people be able to marry who they want was something worthwhile. Mm-hmm. And we could hate each other over everything. But you know what? The majority of us, we all kind of agreed that this was a hill worth dying on, that we all kind of felt like, yeah, its time has come, and we're all kind of accepting. We're all kind of, I mean, Republicans were the ones that basically let this happen, right? Because the left was far ahead of Republicans on this. Mm-hmm. And they were just waiting for Republicans to come around. And they did. They did. They came around. So how intolerant can these people be?
We're not that much far ahead. You know, I mean, Obama didn't say that he was in favor of it. You know,
Agreed. That this is a phenomena of the last 15 years for sure. Mm-hmm. So what I find, again, to be interesting is how that's being, well, how we, if that's what it needs, again, if we are united by the struggle, what's something that the left and the right can both fight to accomplishing, so we don't have to be on either side of the wall, you know, forming essentially a Cold War against each other, which is essentially what this whole Facebook, you know, this FANG shit is. It's a Cold War. And I'm trying to figure out what's something that we can both try and knock down together. I thought the war would be something. It's not.
No, the Democrats are all war hawks. Many of the Republicans are war hawks. You know, everyone's a war hawk.
It's not going to be. It's not going to be that. You think the opioid epidemic would be an issue, but you know, that's not nearly making any headlines. And frankly, I'm trying to figure this out. Like, what's something Republicans and Democrats can fight together with the same goal in mind, and almost come to the same conclusions on how to fight it, because that's the thing. Like, we have to agree on how to fight it, right? It wasn't like Republicans were fighting for like privatization of marriage so that gays can get married. They want the federal government to recognize it for benefit reasons and other things that make sense. But we have to be on the same page from start to finish on something with each other, so we can, you know, learn that we need each other in order to get things done. And I'm trying to figure out what that would be. It's not the war. I mean, maybe it's legalizing marijuana. You know, who knows?
Yeah, I mean, that would make sense.
That'd be kind of cool. Yeah.
Well, at this point, it's not like, I mean, the Democrats aren't going to do anything that the Republicans support. You know, they'll just take the opposite position no matter what. So,
except for legalizing marijuana.
Yeah.
You know, if you made it into a personal liberty issue, I would love to see that happen. And I hate to say it, but I think honestly the most important thing to do right now, outside of ending illegal wars, and the drug war in general, right? I think the drug war is such a great common ground to fight against. Although maybe, you know, the warning signs from people like Shapiro, which is like, look, I think, you know, the floodgates may really open up if we legalize drugs. And he may be right on that, just like a lot of people may have been, may have had a point to be made about the issue with gay marriage. However, I would say, the drug war is great common ground. Ending the war in around the world, these illegal wars would also be ideal. But honestly, in the end, I think it's going to be something like what's that we can all agree on.
It's something actually, and I must admit, this is something that Republicans and Democrats have come together on recently, the Criminal Justice Reform Act of 2018, which was pushed by, I believe, by Jared Kushner, of all people, and others. But it's an act to amend the criminal code and other enactments to allow the reform of criminal justice laws to include a procedure for rehabilitation of offenders. So this weakens a lot of the draconian criminal laws that we have, and just offers, assumedly, in theory, more options for rehab. So, you know, that could be a good thing, perhaps, or at least it's something that I think Democrats and Republicans would both seem willing to support. It is interesting that, you know, Republicans have got this bill. This bill was pushed forward initially by Republicans, and they're always historically known for tough on crime. So this is interesting. At least that's something.
Yeah, and I think that could sometimes be enough. You know, if reforming the criminal justice system, I think reforming the criminal justice system is like extremely complicated. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'd say if you focused on, like, you know, reforming drug sentences for people that use versus people that sell, you know, I think that's the crux of something that's very tangible. It's like a much smaller, you know, it's a molehill, not a mountain. You know what I mean? And I think we need a molehill just to get us to work together again. And that may just be, you know, rescheduling marijuana just in general. Like, I mean, that could be enough. So maybe something small like that. You know, that looks like a pretty complex bill. So I don't know how much of that is feasible and what other stuff is going to be attached to that sort of thing. Yeah, again, I mistrust government quite a bit, but you know, very much like the gay marriage law, which was like, hey, it will be federally recognized no matter where you go. It's like, good. I like that. Like, that's simple. I think if we do the same thing, like, we're going to reschedule marijuana. It's like, let's just do that first. You know, I think that's very tangible. And I think it's very important, honestly, as more and more states decriminalize marijuana and actually have it for recreational purposes. So,
yeah. By the way, this is not that is not the bill that I thought it was. Just that was something completely different. I come to understand, but yeah, there's a criminal justice reform bill headed for probably going to. This is the one. That one that I brought up was didn't look like something great, actually. That one was for the government of Anguilla. I don't know what that is exactly. But
Be some sort of British subsidiary due to their flag.
let me see.
Let's look this up.
Because, yeah, British overseas territory in the West Indies and Caribbean. But this bill is meant to decriminalize and weaken child pornography laws, and
I beg your pardon.
Yes, and publication.
Right, so hopefully there is some people that are pushing back against this.
And grooming of children aged 18. So grooming, so grooming of children for unsavory purposes. So that is not something that I support. That is not the bill that I support in any way.
Oh, come on, Dan. The last thing you want to be considered is not tough enough on child grooming.
Yeah. And I'm very tough on that, child grooming, in fact.
Speaking of which, you haven't heard much from Tommy Robinson lately, have you?
No, oddly, interestingly.
I think they ruined that man.
Yeah, it's very possible. But it is amazing how he'd become like this figure. In fact, just this year, he went from being like kind of a cult figure to like a real political leader in the UK, and a symbol of sovereignty, individual sovereignty. So it'll be interesting. But I know a guy who is from Scotland and a recent American immigrant who recently got a citizenship, and he was saying how he's like, he doesn't feel comfortable with the lionization of Tommy Robinson. And he's very patriotic and very right-leaning, gun-loving Scotsman. But he's like, look, man, I knew Tommy Robinson when, he was this hooligan. He's a tough guy. He's a rough figure. And
yeah, sure. He ran with the EDL for a while, too, the English Defence League.
Yeah, he's like, he had some opinions that were pretty bizarre. So, who knows? People can grow and change, and I think it's entirely plausible that that's the case with him. But
I think he tempered down as he got older, and I think a lot of people do. I mean, I had.
I think people need to be open to that happening. So, anyway, point being. Criminal justice reform bill headed to vote under Republican Congress. So that is an interesting thing. Anyway, we'll see where things head. 2019 is upon us. We might have another stream before the end of the year, but if not, I'm glad to be doing this, and I'm glad that I don't know, good boy. Any predictions for 2019? Optimistic, pessimistic?
The seas will boil and the skies will rain fire. Cats and dogs living together, mass hysteria.
Well, you heard it here tonight, folks. Get your homes in order. Get your bunkers in order. And
canned food and lots of water, folks. We'll be okay. Dan, it's a pleasure, and I'm glad to be in the fight with you. And I look forward to 2019. So let's keep doing this. And if anything, Merry Christmas, everyone. Happy holidays, and enjoy yourselves.
All right, same here. Merry Christmas, everybody. Have a great holiday season. Bye-bye.